Hello, thank you for joining us today for this town hall on reproductive health. My name is Rory Dicker, and I'm the director of the Margaret Cunningham Women's Center here at Vanderbilt and senior lecturer in the Department of Gender and Sexuality Studies. I'm also serving as a member of the university's task force on reproductive health, as are all of the other panelists here today. I will be moderating today's town hall on this timely and important topic. I'd like to start by introducing our panelists. We have G.L. Black, Dean of Students and Vice Provost for Student Affairs. Pam Jones, Associate Vice Chancellor for Health and Wellness and Associate Professor in the Vanderbilt University School of Nursing. Ronald Alvarez, Chairman and Clinical Service Chief, Obstetrics and Gynecology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center, and Betty and Lonnie S. Burnett, Professor of Obstetrics and Gynecology. Michelle Tella, Deputy General Counsel, and Thelma Mcbride Murray, Associate Provost, University Professor of Health Policy and Human and Organizational Development in Peabody College and the School of Medicine, and the Lois Autry Betts Chair of Education and Human Development at Peabody College, also the Task Force Chair. Thank you, all the panelists. Today's town hall is a response to the recent Supreme Court decision, Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. This decision overturned the Roe v. Wade decision, which guaranteed the federal right to an abortion. Today, we will hear facts about the implications of the Dobbs decision and the work being done to address the impact of this decision on the Vanderbilt community. Before we begin, we want to recognize that the abortion issue is complex and that people have diverging opinions on it. We'll start with remarks from each panelist, and then we will have a Q&A portion where we will use questions that were submitted in advance of today's town hall. We know that we won't have time to answer all questions that were submitted. We also will be sharing a link in the chat to submit additional questions that arise during the town hall. The task force will work to gather all submitted questions and answer as many as possible in the coming weeks. We will place those answered questions on the task force website. I'd now like to welcome Deputy General Counsel Michelle Tella. Thank you for being here today, Michelle. As we begin this conversation, we thought it was important to have a chance to talk with somebody who could speak about the Supreme Court decision itself and what this decision means from a legal perspective. So could you give us a brief overview of where things stand with Tennessee law and what that means for faculty, staff, postdocs, and students?
Absolutely. Thanks very much for having me today, Rory. I do want to start, as you suggested, by summarizing the recent Supreme Court decision, and then I'll move from there to give some detail about how that federal decision affects us here in Tennessee, including because of several different pieces of legislation that have been adopted by the Tennessee legislature and signed by the governor over the last several years. As you mentioned, Rory, on June 24th, the U.S. Supreme Court issued an opinion in a case called Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization. That case was brought to the court to address whether bans on abortion violate the U.S. Constitution. In the court's decision, a majority of the justices voted to overturn earlier Supreme Court precedent that had been established over the last several decades in two cases, Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. In the Dobbs case, the majority of the justices here rejected that earlier precedent and found that there is no federal constitutional right to abortion as had been recognized under those earlier decisions. As a result of the court's decision in Dobbs, authority to regulate or prohibit outright abortion is returned to each of the states. So our audience members may be asking what's going on here in Tennessee. And I do want to emphasize that there's a different picture in pretty much every state across the board. But here in Tennessee, in 2019, the state legislature passed and the governor signed into law a bill called the Tennessee Human Life Protection Act. That bill is often referred to as the trigger bill. So if that's what you hear on the news or online, that's the law that we're talking about. That bill was written in anticipation that one day the Supreme Court would make a decision along the lines that it did in Dobbs and overturn Roe v. Wade and Planned Parenthood v. Casey. And if that happened, the trigger bill was designed to take effect sort of automatically as a result of that kind of decision. And Tennessee is one of 13 states with some form of a trigger bill. The trigger bill here in Tennessee has a few important parts for our audience members to be aware of. First, it makes it a felony crime to either perform or attempt to perform an abortion. Secondly, the trigger bill provides an important affirmative defense to prosecution in certain circumstances. So if an abortion is performed by a licensed physician and the physician determined in their good faith medical judgment that the abortion was necessary for certain reasons, then they wouldn't be prosecuted. The grounds on which you can claim that affirmative defense are if either you're acting as a physician to prevent the death of a pregnant person, or if you're acting to prevent serious risk of substantial and irreversible impairment of a major bodily function of the pregnant person. I realize that's a lot of words, and hopefully Dr. Alvarez can give us a little bit more detail on that later on. But importantly, the trigger bill does not subject a pregnant person themselves to criminal conviction or other penalty. So it's not a crime to get an abortion, it's a crime to perform an abortion. I also want to note that the trigger bill does not contain exceptions for certain cases. So there's no exception for rape or incest, or for cases where the fetus has an abnormality and is not viable as a result. Law, that trigger bill takes effect 30 days after the final judgment in the Dobbs decision, not 30 days after the court ruled on June 24th, but 30 days after the court issues its formal written legal judgment. And the Tennessee Attorney General recently confirmed that that means the trigger bill will take effect on August 25th. After that date, all abortions in Tennessee are going to be prohibited, except for those that satisfy the death or serious risk affirmative defenses, that I described earlier. For the next several weeks between now and August 25th, abortion in Tennessee is generally prohibited after 6 weeks of gestational age. That restriction was included in a law that was passed in 2020. Sometimes it's called the heartbeat bill. And that bill didn't take effect until after the Supreme Court's recent decision in Dobbs, because it had been challenged before as being prohibited consistent with the earlier court's precedent. Another part of the legal framework in Tennessee comes from a law adopted earlier this year, which is called the Tennessee Abortion-Inducing Drug Risk Protocol Act. That law takes effect January 1st, 2023, and it prohibits providing abortion-inducing drugs by courier or delivery or mail service. So in other words, someone providing pills to somebody else in order to cause an abortion would be illegal under that law. So I know that's a lot. There are a lot of different things to think about here and a lot of moving pieces. And I know that some of our attendees had asked in advance questions about what this means for the availability of contraception, like birth control pills or IUDs. So I want to be responsive to that very real concern. And the answer is that these laws that I just described do not affect or prohibit the use of contraception. That has been confirmed publicly by some of the legislative sponsors of the bill. So that answer. I also just want to underscore again that this is really an evolving situation. Lots of states across the country are considering additional actions related to abortion. Some of them are introducing bills that would codify the right to abortion in state law, and others that would impose additional restrictions or prohibitions against abortion. And some of those initiatives are going to be put up to vote by voters in those states. Some of them might be considered by the legislative bodies in those states and may ultimately be decided in courts in those states. In addition, back to the federal government has indicated that it will take steps to protect access to contraception, to medication abortion, and also to support the rights of people to travel across state lines to receive reproductive health care that might not be available in the state where they live. So there's probably more detail coming on that front. And so in sum, our team here in the Office of the General Counsel is keeping an eye on these things. And we're working with our colleagues in the Division of Community and Government Relations to monitor these developments, both at the state level and at the federal level. And we'll continue to work with our task force colleagues to make sure that the university is well informed.
Thank you so much, Michelle, for all of that information. I'd like now to welcome our next panelist, Associate Provost Thelma Mcbride Murray. Belma is chairing our university task force on reproductive health. Belma, since the decision came down in late June, can you tell us about the task force, the priorities of the task force and the actions so far, and what the task force will focus on in the near future?
Thanks again, Rory, for hosting this town hall. And I'm just thinking about Michelle's discussion earlier, and you can tell this is really a complex issue. And I sincerely appreciate the leadership of our provost and chancellor for being forward-thinking about how to prepare the university community for the day for which we're now experiencing and all the complexities that we don't know yet. As Michelle said, it's an evolving situation. But the task force was launched in early June, and with specific charge from the provost. And we've been spending our time initially organizing into subcommittees to begin to address all the complexities that Michelle began to discuss earlier in terms of the spillover effect of this decision on the Vanderbilt community. Decisions all the way from HR issues to developing strategies to really begin to think about the implication of this policy for research and teaching, health service delivery, communication, and also ways that we could begin to then disseminate and receive information from the community. And it's not only to share with the community what we're doing, but also to develop a strategy whereby we can be informed of, one, how well are we doing? Are we addressing the priorities? Or are there specific ways in which we should be addressing issues that is much more fitting for the needs of the community? The first project that we spent quite a bit of time on that we were able to launch last week was a recommendation statement, and I really appreciate the leadership of Pam and GL for facilitating a lot of the work on that initiative, receiving feedback from various constituents across campus, including our staff, as we began to develop this recommendation statement, which I'm hoping all of you have been able to take a look at. And if you have questions or concerns, that you'll feed them back to us. It was also great to see the statement from our chancellor and provost as we launched those statements in order for the community to realize their level of support for the efforts that were put forth in the statement. And Rory, sincerely appreciate you for really launching the first event, which was held in the Women's Center before the task force had a chance to do a lot of the things we're doing. So you were a pioneer in beginning our program efforts, but we're also in the process of planning other programs beside the town hall, which we're hosting today. And the initiative that was mentioned earlier is that we've developed a website specifically designated for the task force. And we view that not only as an information exchange platform, but also a way to be able to receive information and disseminate information from the community and back to the community. We really appreciate the engagement of students, and I know that many of you want to be involved, and we know that because we've received numerous emails volunteering to do lots of things, and we want to rally that energy in order to be able to really utilize your role in the process of the task force endeavors, as well as the faculty and also the staff. We've received proposals from students, and I want the students to know that the task force has reviewed them. We're taking them very seriously. In fact, we use many of the ideas proposed by you in your statement as we began to craft the initial set of recommendations. So it's to let you know that this is not a one-way process of our doing everything and giving it back to the community. It's for you to take part as well, because this is a Vanderbilt task force, which means you are part of this task force, the entire community. So I want to take the time now to really thank all of those groups that have been engaged with us thus far and encouraging you to continue to do that. We've made really deliberate efforts to reach out to not only students, but faculty and staff. And we really want to we're now forging ahead with the next phase of the task force. Because these issues are so complex and so large, we thought about dividing our work into phases. And so what is happening now is the first phase. The second phase will encompass many more activities that we'll have a chance to talk a bit about what's forthcoming later on in the panel today. But my job as chair of the task force is to facilitate the charge of the provost to the committee, which is to make sure that we're engaging and encouraging others to create an environment that is supportive and inclusive, and that we demonstrate what we do and all that we do. That means that we're not marginalizing any voices or people's opinions. We want to encourage intellectual dialogue, because being there for each other is really important as we go through this process, and view this really as a model for us to begin to think about rapid response to other critical issues and events that may occur that have impact for our Vanderbilt community. And what I want to encourage you to do is think of this as we're all in this together. It's the Vanderbilt way. And I'm really honored to serve as the chair of this incredible committee and task force. Thank you.
Thank you, Belma, for sharing those details. As a member of the task force myself, I've seen firsthand how our colleagues from across campus are employing their expertise to actively address the impact on our community. I'd like now to welcome Ronald Alvarez, Chairman and Clinical Service Chief, Obstetrics and Gynecology at Vanderbilt University Medical Center. Ronald, in the past few weeks since the decision has come down, can you talk to us a bit about VUMC's approach to the decision and how it has changed the work you're doing? And how will these changes affect individuals?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for the opportunity to be part of this distinguished task force. We've been pretty busy on the medical center side, trying to understand all the nuances and implications of the law. And I think Michelle did a wonderful job reviewing what is a very complex set of laws that are, as she said, continuing to evolve. Long before even the leaked version of the decision came out, I was in conversations with Dr. Balzer, even during the midst of the COVID pandemic and busy hospital services that we had here during the COVID pandemic, and started a conversation with him about this decision was coming down the pike, and we needed to get ready to be able to respond to it, no matter which direction it went to. And so once the decision did come down, we had a medical center task force appointed by Dr. Balzer, consisting of a number of different stakeholders, subject matter experts in abortion care, legal people, communications, legislative liaisons, quality folks, to kind of look at what were our current policies and how did they need to change. And just to sort of level set for everyone, at Vanderbilt, when we look at abortions, we sort of look at them for maternal indications, fetal indications, rape and incest, and what I would call elective abortions. And at Vanderbilt, we had experts who were involved in doing abortions for maternal indications, doing abortions for fetal indications, and doing it for rape and incest. And we had part of our faculty working with Planned Parenthood and CareFem to provide elective abortions. And we also had our trainees that were involved in the care of these patients too. So as Michelle talked about, the law actually now sort of restricts us to only working within the maternal indication lane. And so we had to go through a very quick process of altering our policies, altering our standards, what we would call SOPs or guidelines for our providers to sort of define, what we thought were those indications or an all-inclusive table of indications we thought were related that could lead to either maternal death or serious harm, bodily harm to the women who were pregnant. And then we also had to kind of look through what were all the processes by which we could perform the abortion with respect to the forms that we had to fill out, all the ultrasound requirements, et cetera, et cetera. So it's a large group of paperwork that we need to fill out. And then, interestingly enough, the abortion care, as we think defined by the law right now, also applies to patients with ectopics and patients with molar pregnancies. And we're required to do a lot of different paperwork for that. So we spent a lot of time developing the policies, the SOPs. We developed a frequently asked questions document for our providers and provider resources so that that our providers could have information about how to refer patients for pregnancy services that are not allowed here in the state of Tennessee. And we had a number of different educational sessions for not only my department, where most of these procedures are done, but that also included other stakeholders like the Department of Medicine, Department of Emergency Medicine. And we continue to have a number of different educational sessions so we can get everyone up to speed. And we will continue to do those further as we start to learn about what the consequences will be for us having a more restrictive reproductive health environment. We anticipate we'll have more, more pregnancies. And as you may or may not know, Tennessee is as one of the southern states that has amongst the highest disparities or poorest outcomes in when it comes to maternal morbidity and mortality and perinatal morbidity and mortality. So these laws are undoubtedly are going to make that problem worse. And we're also going to see more patients who have complications from abortions that we'll have to deal with too. And we're getting ourselves as prepared as possible for that. So what I've talked about mainly has been operations. We've also worked with Dr. Balzer to help formulate communications. So you saw the VUMC response to this, and particularly pointing out the worsening and disparities and maternal outcomes that we anticipate will come with this new restrictive environment. And we're also using it to sort of inform some of our legislative strategy. And we would like to be able to go to the legislature and start advocating for us to be able to get back into that fetal lane, particularly when it comes to patients who have fetuses that have lethal anomalies that are not going to result in a live birth, and also for rape and incest, and to be able to remove some of the burdensome paperwork that my team has to do when we're dealing with an ectopic or molar pregnancy. So that's our first legislative priorities will be in that particular area. So undoubtedly, as Michelle said, there's going to be further legislative activities that we're going to have to watch closely and be nimble and adapt as we go forward. And hopefully we can continue to work with the legislator to kind of get us back to what we were doing at Vanderbilt, at the Vanderbilt Medical Center, particularly with respect to the maternal, fetal, and rape and incest lanes that we were working in previously.
Thank you so much, Ronald. Next, I'd like to talk to both Associate Vice Chancellor Pam Jones and Vice Provost and Dean of Students GL Black, as they've been working closely together on the implications of the Supreme Court decision to our Vanderbilt community members. Pam, maybe you'd like to jump in first to talk about the decision's implications, and then what work you, GL, and others are doing to address those implications. And then we'll turn to GL. Maybe you'll chime in then to talk specifically about the impacts to our current students. So I'll turn things over to you, Pam.
Thank you, Rory. And again, thank you for pulling this together. I'm always proud of Vanderbilt University and the way that we create good dialogue and earnest conversations in these kind of topics, even when they're very, very hard to have conversations about. And I don't know about you, the rest of the panelists, and our participants, but after listening to the first part of this, I feel like I need to take a really deep breath because the implications are incredibly broad and incredibly deep. So let's all take that breath first, and then I'll get into some details of what, yeah, I see Belma doing her cleansing breath. It's been several busy weeks. And what I want to say is that we took a very thoughtful approach to this. We did not want to come up with solutions that were hastily developed that may not be inclusive of all of our community's needs, as well as just weren't thought out well. So I know there's some people in the community, in the audience, who are probably a little frustrated that it took us this long, although we feel like we've worked really fast. But we understand that this is an incredibly important issue. And we wanted to take our time to try to come up with solutions that were actually helpful to people. So the other way that I frame this is, you know, anytime we as an organization, as a nation, as individuals face a major change, it causes all of us to be creative and think differently about our approach. And to me, that's the silver lining of things, is that we engage differently to look at topics. And that this is one of those areas. And what this has allowed us to do is to come up with better ways to support our entire community around, you know, reproductive health, around parenting issues. And so GL and I have been leading a smaller group that are, we're the boots on the ground. We're the operational people who go out and work with HR and all of our great colleagues and come up with concrete solutions. And we're very proud that we've done that, as Belma already pointed out. Lots of things are coming. And I hope you've read the announcement. If you have not, please do. But first thing is really around support for our community. And we're doing that in a couple ways, and I'll let GL touch on a number of them in the student realm. But first of all, we're trying to have prevention as much as we can. One of the first things is free oral contraceptions for all students out of student health. And the other issue is ensuring access to emergency contraception, which we have done, and we're working in partnership with Dr. Alvarez. The other thing that we did was recognize and acknowledge that parental leave needs to be supported as well. And that is a major commitment of the university. And again, I'm very proud that we are doing this. Staff prior to this had no paid time for parental leave, and now they have 8 weeks of time. We're still working through a few of the details. You know, devil's always in the details, and we're working through a few to say, when does it start? What's the effective date? What do we do about people who are currently out? So bear with us while we get through those details. And I know there's been lots of questions about that, and there will be things forthcoming soon about that. The other thing that we're doing is a student and employee critical support fund. And as Michelle mentioned already, we've always had mechanisms to support students' special needs and employees' special needs. But this can be used for procedures that are not available in the state of Tennessee. And it can also be used for pregnancy-related issues that when an abortion is not the choice for the individual. So again, we want to support our entire community because we recognize that this is a very personal and very pertinent issue for many. The last thing that I'll mention, and then I'll stop talking and let GL talk. I tend to talk a lot. The last thing that I'll mention is a new role that's going to be in place. And that role is a women's health and parenting resource coordinator. Let me say, we talked a lot about do we use the terminology women's health? And because that's a standardly understood terminology, at least you know, in the healthcare sector, we decided to use that for now. So please don't think that terminology is not inclusive. And we recognize that it's not the perfect term, but we want people to understand what we're trying to do. And we've already identified an individual. She is a very experienced nurse who is very knowledgeable in this area. And she will work for me in the Office of Health and Wellness. And the reason for that is that we have the skill set and the expertise around privacy. How do we maintain privacy for individuals who access those services? She also is extremely trained in having unbiased conversations and does that with women and patients all the time. So I'm excited about that because, again, I think it's layering on support that people need and are going to need as we move forward with this. So I'll stop and let GL add some things in the student realm.
Thanks, Pam. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here with you today. I think I want to start by emphasizing that new position because I think that's a wonderful addition. And on the student side, that person will be able to interface very clearly with our student care network, which I think this is a great opportunity to remind our students who are participating today about the student care network and all the health and support services that we provide through entities like Student Care Coordination and the University Counseling Center and the Center for Student Wellbeing. All of those are going to be available, and it happens that we've hired 12 new staff members in the Student Care Network. So we have a lot of robust support for students in terms of mental health and well-being. I do want to just go through a close partnership that we've been working on with the Student Health Center in particular here. And as many of you probably know, the Student Health Center provides primary care, including sexual and reproductive health services for our students. They are going to continue to provide those services, and we are making emergency oral contraception available at Student Health for free at no cost for students. We've also been working with Student Health and with Dr. Alvarez to develop sort of a rapid access protocol that will allow Student Health to be able to connect students who may need other emergency contraception or may have other urgent reproductive health service needs, and they'll be able to get in to see a provider. As Pam mentioned, another area that we've worked on is related to the Student Critical Support Fund. And as she noted, that can be used to fund unexpected expenses, whether that's travel, procedures, or other pregnancy related expenses. We are working right now. I know we've gotten many questions about what's the process and what will that look like. And we are currently working on developing the process for that, really with an eye towards a lot of what I think we're hearing from students in terms of concerns around privacy considerations, and hoping that the new coordinator can have a role in helping us work on that and think through provision of that funding to students in that process. I wanted to go back just for a moment to talk about our subcommittee's process, in part to answer a question that I know we've been getting, but also as Pam noted, we felt like we were moving pretty expeditiously. But I will say there were also, constraints, I think, on us while the decision, as you've heard today, is very complicated, very nuanced, has many implications. And while we were gathering questions and concerns from various parts of our campus community, we're also waiting to see what experts in different areas were saying about this, legal experts on insurance, and really trying to make recommendations that were well-founded and thought out based on the information that we had available to us. So that process, in terms of, as Pam said, sort of the boots on the ground information gathering, was really important, I think, for our subcommittee, and really trying to think holistically about the health and well-being of our community. One particular example I just wanted to raise here is that we were waiting to hear from our insurance carrier for our student health insurance plan. And I know there have been some questions about that plan for going forward, and they had not released their path forward until very recently. And they have now confirmed, and this is really related to the fact that the type of plan that it is and that it originates in the state of Tennessee, that it is subject to Tennessee state laws, and that does impact their coverage of abortion. So going forward, they will not be able to cover and as you can see why this is important, is as we think about that critical student support fund, these linkages between these different decisions and the expertise and information that we're receiving were really to kind of inform what the best path forward was in terms of these recommendations. So I know that's a question that we got, and I thought that would just be helpful to explain a little bit more about the process. And I'll pause there and let us get on to questions.
Thanks so much, Pam and GL, for explaining so much about the process, as well as giving us some information. There are lots of moving parts, and I think all of today's panelists have really explained different elements. But I'm hearing that things are going to be changing, so that we'll have to stay abreast of all of this. So it's really important for us to know what's going on at Vanderbilt, and I want us to have a chance to talk through some of the questions that we've received. I'll sort of read a question and kind of call on a panelist to answer the question. And these are questions that were submitted in advance of today's event. And please, even if I call on Michelle, for example, if somebody else wants to jump in, please do so. We won't be able to get to all of the questions that were submitted in advance or the ones submitted today, but we will be working to answer as many of these questions as we can in the coming weeks. So I wanted people to know that, and we will share them on the task force website. So let me start here with you, Michelle. Faculty and students alike have been asking how these changes in the law affect their ability to engage in speech, teaching, advocacy about abortion and reproductive health. And can you talk a little bit about how the laws affect those kinds of activities?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great question, Rory. None of the laws that I described earlier include any explicit restrictions on what faculty or students can say or advocate for, either for or against abortion or other reproductive health care. That's true whether they agree or disagree with the Supreme Court's decision, whether or not they agree or disagree with the Tennessee legislature's position on these issues. The laws that I described focus really on regulating medical procedures and what licensed medical professionals can do in that specific medical context, and also the use of abortion-inducing drugs. One area that I know a lot of us have been concerned about is making sure that our colleagues in the health professions can continue to teach healthcare in the ways that is necessary to provide this type of procedure. And so that's something that I know we and our colleagues at VUMC are going to continue to keep focused on in the teaching context, with a position that teaching something is not necessarily the same thing as performing an illegal act. And so we'll focus on making sure that our teachers can continue to teach.
Thank you. This is a question that came in about privacy, and this could be for you, Michelle, or Pam may want to jump in, but how will the university protect my private pregnancy-related information?
Well, I'll take that one first. And again, part of what I described about where this office will reside, where this individual will reside, and the code of ethics, if you will, that will be used around this information relates to that role and the training of that individual in that role. So that information will be treated with privacy expectations similar to HIPAA, which I think everybody knows what HIPAA is. Technically, we're not a healthcare organization, so we're not obligated under HIPAA, but we do everything per those standards, basically. And anyone who has access to any information will be fully HIPAA trained. So we feel really comfortable about being able to do that and still partner with, the UCC and EAP for our employees in a de-identified way that will get people the support they need, but without disclosing any personal information.
And I'll just add, on the student side of things, the university takes very seriously our obligation to comply with FERPA, the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act, which protects students' personally identifiable information. And I know we've also had a question come in about the research context for faculty who might be conducting research on individuals who may have had an abortion or considering having an abortion. And the good news there is that there is a framework under the federal research regulatory structure for people who are researching those sensitive issues to be able to receive what's called a certificate of confidentiality from the National Institutes of Health. And those certificates are issued automatically for certain federally funded research, but can also be applied for in other situations. So it's important for researchers to know that that's a tool that's available to them too.
Thanks, Michelle. GL, can you talk a little bit about how the university will support students' free expression about this issue?
Yeah, so as Michelle already sort of outlined, there aren't currently any restrictions in terms of expression related to this. So, we will continue to operate as we do in supporting students in freedom of expression on any topic. And we obviously have our own policies and procedures related to freedom of expression on campus and in our student handbook. But really our mechanisms through our student engagement and leadership area of our student affairs division with support for student organizations and helping students craft a plan to participate in activities that they want to do. So we will continue in that vein as we do with other topics.
Thanks. And this is a sort of a follow-up more for Michelle. And this, again, a question that came in. Under what circumstances will the university defend my actions from a legal perspective?
Yeah, that's a great question, Rory. Most of the time when people are speaking on an issue of public concern like this, faculty or students or staff are going to be acting in their individual capacity, unless they're specifically identified to be acting on behalf of the university. But in those situations where someone is acting on behalf of the university in good faith and in a manner that's reasonably understood to be lawful, then the university would defend those actions.
Okay, thank you very much. This question seems to be coming up too in the Q&A, but this is Belma for you. How can members of the Vanderbilt community share their input with the task force?
Currently we are in the process of developing the website such that there will be a place and space for people to insert or upload questions or comments. And we're developing a strategy where we have designated people to respond. Currently, looking at the way that things were done during COVID-19, we're thinking a 2-week turnaround, but the extent to which we can get to those rapid responses, we will do them when we can. The other way is to reach out to task force members, which is what has already begun to happen. I frequently get emails directly sent to me asking me questions. And that's really how we got a lot of the questions that you're using today, Rory. People really reached out to GL, to Andre, and other people on the committee, the task force that they feel comfortable reaching out to. But we're also developing a structure, organizing a structure where things are much more unified and deliberate in the way that we develop these mechanisms to receive feedback. But currently, the questions that's being posted in the chat now, we will put them into this mechanism to begin to create a venue whereby we look at questions and then vet them out to be responded to. But again, it's a work in progress. But right now, my suggestion is the most immediate way to do it is through members of the committee that task force that to send questions to us and we'll respond.
Roy,
Okay.
if I could just add one thing to that, because I think part of, and GL and I have talked quite a bit about this, and I've talked with our colleagues in HR. One thing about this new role is it's a brand new program, and we are going to shape it based on feedback from our community. And we're also going to use what I think of as evidence-based leadership practices to do performance improvement on it if it's not meeting the need. So that is sort of an ongoing vehicle for input, and GL and I will work very specifically to engage students and very specifically with HR to engage staff and those faculty and staff and those just in that program's formation.
Thank you. Thank you for that clarification. So this is another question that came in, and either Velma or GL might want to respond to it. What plans does the task force have for continuous student engagement around reproductive health? So, for example, will there be more webinars or meetings with student organization leaders? I don't know if that's a GL question.
GL, you can start and I'll chime in if there's a need.
Sure. As Belma said, a lot of the information input questions that we've received so far have been from students, have been by direct outreach to me and to Andre Christie Mizell, who's the dean of the graduate school and works with the Graduate Student Council. So I've been in communication with Vanderbilt student government, a number of other individual students and student organizations, and VSG has also been very helpful in funneling questions and information to us. Right now, we are looking at what does the sort of span of opportunities look like here. And I think that may take multiple forms. Some of it may be more engagement opportunities like webinars, or even, once we're all back in session, whether those are, in-person programs, opportunities, processing sessions, as well as some opportunities for students to provide more direct input and sort of advise the task force. I think, as was mentioned earlier, Vanderbilt student government had created a couple of different proposals that they sent forward, and those were very helpful. They were shared with the entire task force membership and really helpful in thinking through issues and hearing students. So thinking about how to systematize that type of advice for the task force, whether through a council or some other body, is something else that we're actively working on right now. So there will be more details for students coming soon.
Thank you. I don't know if you want to add anything.
I'd like to add, and we also encourage the students to make suggestions for programming. We have a subcommittee specifically focused on programming and ways to orchestrate events. Some of the colleges have already begun to develop, for example, critical conversation, and invited the task force to come and be a part of that. But we are here to facilitate the work. We don't have to be the creator of it, but we can also be the facilitators of some of the various activities and events and ways of getting the word out and being engaged that come from the community, where we can then begin to think of ways that we can provide resources and support.
Yeah, that's absolutely the case. I've been getting emails from people with ideas for programs and possible engagement opportunities. So I'm on that subcommittee. So stay tuned for that. Here's another question that came up. When students are seeking reproductive health services or support, and I should say GL, this is for you again. When students are seeking reproductive health services or support, will they be granted anonymity, specifically for their, I guess, so that their parents are not aware, is what the import of that question.
Yeah, and I mean, so generally speaking, Pam and Michelle, I think, both referred to some privacy laws that are relevant in this context, both HIPAA and FERPA. And obviously, students' educational records are protected by FERPA. And medical records are protected by HIPAA. And so this may be a little bit context dependent in terms of what types of services and what types of support they're seeking. But in either case, with FERPA and HIPAA protections, generally speaking, parents would not be notified about a student seeking services or support. I do think students would want to consider any nuances related to their particular situation. So for example, if a student is on their parents' insurance, and it is the case that their benefit statements or bills or other things related to that insurance policy might go to their parents, that may be a way that their parents would be indirectly sort of notified about a service or support that they may have sought. And there may be other, particular situations if a parent has access to an account or something like that. But in terms of the privacy protections under FERPA and HIPAA, there would not be, affirmative notification to parents or other family members.
Okay, thank you. Pam, could students and employees seeking out-of-state procedures use the employee and student critical support funds to help alleviate travel expenses?
Yes, and again, we're working through the details of that, but we recognize that travel out of state is an issue for individuals who choose to have a procedure out of state. So we are working actively on that right now. JL and I met with a few people this morning to work on the student side, and we're working on it from a faculty and staff side as well in partnership with HR.
Thanks. And this is another question for you, but it's about the new position. Will the Women's Health and Parenting Resource Coordinator have a physical space to meet with Vanderbilt community members, or would the services be primarily virtual?
It's a physical space, and we've tried to be thoughtful about that because we clearly recognize that the link between mental health and physical health in this context is extremely important. So the current plan is for that individual to be half-time, co-located with EAP, and the other half-time co-located with, the care coordination and GL's team in the UCC. And we feel like that is a really good way to do it because it will promote accessing additional services. And we want people to be able to access services related to their mental health in this issue and the stress associated with parenting, reproductive rights, you name it, the stress is out there. So we're going to try to really combine that good work to be sure that we're maximizing our effectiveness.
Yeah, thanks for explaining that. And there's actually a question that relates to mental health, so I'm going to jump to that. There have been a number of questions regarding mental health support surrounding pregnancy and reproductive health. And so is there anything that the university is doing to support its employees in those two areas? I think that the coordinator position, as you're describing it, is something, but I didn't know if you wanted to add anything to respond.
Well, we are doing things that are very exciting, but it's a bit premature to articulate exactly what we're doing. But mental health, both in the student realm and the faculty, staff, and postdoc realm, is about the #1 priority on this campus. And so you're going to see some things happen in the employee realm that provide much, much, much more services than we have today. And GL's team is always working, and he might want to jump in to prioritize mental health of our students.
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, just reminding everyone about the Student Care Network and our continued expansion, both in terms of staff and in terms of resources that are available. We have a telehealth platform as well as our, in-person appointments, lots of virtual tools, lots of other services, workshops, and things. So the Student Care Network website has lots and lots of information about the resources that are available, and the Student Care Coordination team can certainly answer any questions or help guide a student to the right resources. So that's been an ongoing emphasis for student affairs and for the university for a number of years that we continue to work on.
I would also add that if students come or faculty come to see us on the medical center side, we have access to collaborative behavioral health experts who can also be useful. It's not perfect, but we do have some access to good mental health services.
Thank you. This question is something that, Pam, you've talked about already, but perhaps could be reiterated. When does the new parental leave policy take effect, and what is the process to get it?
So good question. And it is in the cooker right now to answer that question. So because of the main question we've gotten is, I'm already out on leave, what does this mean for me? And so we need to be able to answer that in partnership with human resources. And I know that details are being worked on right now, and there will be information forthcoming. Okay,
thank you so much. So I think we're really at the end of our time today. I want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to those who submitted questions. As a reminder, a recording of this town hall will be available on the task force website for later viewing, and we'll continue to work on an FAQ sheet, set of FAQs based on the questions that have been submitted, and those will also be available on the website. So I just want to thank everyone for being here today, and thank you to our panelists. This is the end of our town hall, and I hope you have a good rest of your afternoon.